All right, welcome to the second section on World War II. In this video, we're going to be talking about the actual events that led to war and the first part of the war in Europe. Specifically, the big ideas for this unit are: what are the signs that Europe was going to war, to be engulfed in another war? Two, what was the process of German aggression before the war broke out? Because just like World War II, there was a ton of signs beforehand. And three, what were the reactions to German aggression? So let's start to look at the events. And before I do, I want to explain that for this video, the way I set it up is this is actually a timeline of how events happen. So if you follow this green bar, you'll see the year, and we're going to start from the first event, which occurs in 1935, till we end this video in 1940. So if you're ever confused on where we are, look where the green bar is and where the sidebars are. That will tell you where in the year we are. So we're starting in 1935 when Hitler meets with top German officials. Now remember, Hitler was elected into office in 1933, and he then, 2 years later, meets with top officials to discuss plans for this German question. And now remember, the German question was the idea that he wanted to unite all cultural Germans, so anyone who spoke German, in one country and give them more land. This would be the people that lived in Germany, in Austria, in the outsides of Czechoslovakia and Poland here. This was all occupied German-speaking people. And so in March 12, 1938, German troops just decide one day to march across the border. Not just decide, but they just do, I should say, into Austria here. And they take Austria without a bullet. And then they announced to the world that their union, or Anschluss, with Austria was complete, and that they occupied Austria and all the cultural Germans there, and that these people wanted occupation. Some probably did, and there's evidence for that, but to say all of them did, I'm not quite sure. So then, a little while later, Hitler looks to the lands of the Sudetenland. And this is the mountainous part right around the edge of Czechoslovakia here. And this is where, again, a large portion of Germans are living. And Hitler decides that he should take this land because Germans should be accompanied into the Third Reich and that they need more space. And so, in September 30th, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain signed what's called the Munich Agreement with Hitler, which gave Germany this land here, the Sudetenland, without a single shot. The idea was, Hitler, you're crazy. We're going to give you this land, but then you're going to stop. And you're not going to expand anymore. And this is going to be it. We're just going to appease you. We're going to make you happy and then be done with you. Winston Churchill, who we'll talk about more for the rest of this unit, wasn't the prime minister yet. He'll become the prime minister soon after. And he is an outspoken opponent who believes this was not a good idea, that the Brits dishonored themselves, even if it meant getting in war, that they should have cut Germany off here. He might have been right, too. But throughout this video, I've included a series of awkward pictures of myself as I travel throughout different countries that Germany invaded. So at this time, this is me just after freshman year in high school in good old 2008 in the Czech Republic. So let's recap. Hitler said the Sudetenland here, which is this land on the map, was going to be his last territorial demand. Except that doesn't quite work out because in March 15th, about a half a year later, German troops crossed the border of the Sudetenland here. And if you look, you can see the border. This little mini strip here between the two countries is the Sudetenland, which Germany occupies. That's when, in 1939, Hitler's troops just cross the border and they take all of Czechoslovakia. In August 23rd, Hitler then signs a non-aggression pact with the USSR that we won't declare war on you, you won't declare war on us. This is important because Hitler is already starting to look to declare war on Poland here. But if they declare war on Poland, they will be up against the USSR. So having this non-aggression pact means even though they're going to be up against the same border, neither the Soviets not going to attack Germany, and Germany's not going to attack the Soviets. Again, our little story is complete here. This is a picture of me again in 2008 on this trip, and this is in St. Petersburg in Russia. What a great selfie. This was clearly pre-iPhone days. So then, a little while later, September 1st, German tanks rolled over the border. The Air Force started bombing Poland, and Germany takes Poland in a matter of days, the entire country. They invade, and they take the entire country here. But it's okay because they have the non-aggression pact here, which makes this border not a very hot border, you would say. Because they're not in competition with the USSR. They signed that pact. And within 2 days of the country, of the invasion, France and Britain and their allies declare war on Germany. So you can see Germany from the map here is constantly expanding to other countries. They've expanded to Czechoslovakia, to Austria, and to Poland now. So all these countries are theirs. But then you have Great Britain and France who are starting to open up the Western frontier. As promised, here's our newest picture, again in 2008, with a little hair sticking to the side here, and this is in Poland. I would just like to clarify for the record, I no longer own those sunglasses, and I'm not quite sure why I was wearing them, because they are not that stylish. So, Germany invaded Poland, huh? What happens next? Well, we know that the British and the French troops declare war on Germany, and so what they do is the countries, Britain and France, send their troops along the border here, this margarine line, which is this red line right here across the border, and the troops just sit there for a couple months. The German and the troops stare at the British and the French. Nothing really happens, and that's why it was called a phony war at first, because people thought nothing was going to happen in this war. So while nothing's happening on the east-west side here, they're all kind of looking at each other, seeing what's going to happen next. You have Stalin in the USSR, who then take the Baltic regions. They take Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and they eventually invade Finland and start to take Finland here. So you have the Soviets then be very aggressive as well. So you have the huge Soviet bloc that's established, and then you have all the same time the German Reich that is established here. Okay. Again, this picture on the wonderful trip in 2008 in Estonia at some castle with my shaggy hair and glasses, although I no longer wear glasses. Fun fact of the day. So there's a little surprise. On April 1st of 1940, so we're already almost a year from when World War II started, Hitler launches a surprise attack on Denmark and Norway here. And he said that he took these countries to protect those countries' freedom and independence. A bunch of BS if I've ever heard it before. And then the next month, Hitler then takes the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg here. All of the Low Countries, we call them. Obviously on his way to France. And if you remember from World War I, Germany did the same thing. Remember, they invaded France through Belgium, and that's exactly what happens in World War II here. In just a few months, the summer of 1940, German tanks overtook France through Belgium yet again. You would think the French would learn, and they trapped almost 400,000 troops that were in France at this time, right here. So they were in France between the borders, and then the German troops came over and they were trapped. The troops moved fast. They established a series of rafts and boats that they could find and sailed over to England. And about 330,000 of those 400,000 got across safely. So a big chunk. But by June 22nd, Germany controlled the northern part of France, and they established what's called Vichy France, which is the pro-Nazi government in the south. So even though the Nazis didn't didn't occupy or rule southern France. They established a different government that would do it for them. And this picture comes from years later in 2013 in Paris when I studied abroad and was on spring break. So almost 2 years ago exactly, I visited Paris as well. Notice I lost the shaggy hair. I realized Justin Bieber just wasn't cutting it for me, and I did get some better sunglasses. So as soon as Germany has occupied Denmark, Norway, they start to put a series of bases along the coast here so they can eventually one day invade Britain. They do the same thing in the Netherlands and Belgium, and they put their Luftwaffe or their Air Force right here in northern France. And they do this because they start to go on a series of bombing raids to Great Britain, and primarily in London. And this lasts every day for 2 months. The Germans bombed Britain, in particular London, every day at night. Sometimes more than 2,000 planes a day, trying to just completely destroy the infrastructure of the city. At first, Britain was taken by surprise. They had no idea what was going on. Their Air Force was completely shocked and couldn't do anything really. They kind of dropped the ball. And so they just kind of took these bombings for a couple months. It wasn't until September that the Royal British Air Force was able to kind of make a comeback and start to attack the German fighters. And once they put up a fight, Hitler finally called an end to the bombings of Britain. And this bombing of Britain is what we call the Battle of Britain. And the Battle of Britain is just the series of bombings because German troops never made it on to Great British land or territory. None of the Second World War was fought in Great Britain. It was only this battle here, the series of bombing raids that happened where Britain is damaged. This is similar, if you remember, to World War I as well. Britain is never touched by the war. So because they're an island, they kind of luck out that they're not devastated like the countries of Netherlands, Belgium, or France are. And as promised, our picture is in 2013 when I was on spring break as well. And this spring break, this part of this break was in London with my family. So there you go. All right, so that kind of sums up the events that's going on. You have a series of lands that Hitler try and take from Austria to the Sudetenland and the rest of the world that just watch him takes it. The countries themselves don't react. Britain tries to appease them in the Munich Agreement. But before we end, there's 3 terms I just wanted to go over quickly. One is Winston Churchill. This is the guy right here. He becomes the Prime Minister of England in 1939, and he is very dissatisfied with what Neville Chamberlain does. He believes that when Neville Chamberlain tries to appease Germany, he dishonors England, and he chose to be weak instead of, be strong, even if that meant getting into a war. And so he's really the backbone of fighting Germany. He's one of the only stable leaders throughout a country during the entire war. France didn't have a strong government. The United States didn't get in until much later. It was only really him, Hitler, and Stalin that ran the war. Then you have Charles de Gaulle, who was a French general. He set up the French government in exile in England once Germany took over the country, and he helped England plan a series of attacks and mobilize French forces. If you've ever been to Paris, you will have flown into Charles de Gaulle Airport, named after this man for his efforts in the Second World War. After the war, he does also become Prime Minister of France as well. And finally, I just wanted to mention the term blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg is the German word for a fighting style that they use in World War II, where you take your enemy by surprise. It's a sudden attack by air and by land with tanks, troops, airplanes, bombs, and the goal is to take them by surprise and then achieve a quick victory. This is how Germany was able to occupy Poland in 2 days, the entire country. And they do this through this fighting style that they pioneer. So let's do a quick review. What are the signs that Europe was going to become engulfed in another war? Where you have Germany, who is so concentrated on their image, their power, and their land, they start to try and expand, and they do this by taking over countries. This eventually is going to cause a problem, which it does. Number two, what was the process of German aggression? They started out, in their country, prosecuting Jews, homosexuals, people that they thought didn't belong. They tried to unite Germans, and that meant taking over Austria and Czechoslovakia. And then they tried to take over other countries as well. And so the aggression isn't by surprise. The whole world knows what they're doing. They just kind of ignore it. And what were the reactions to this German aggression? Well, like I said, the world kind of ignored it. The one thing they did is the Prime Minister of England, Neville Chamberlain, sat down with Hitler during the Munich conference to establish a pact with Hitler where Germany would get the Sudetenland, but then they would leave, the rest of Europe alone. That would be their last territorial grab, which Hitler lies about and does more in a few months after. So, the rest of the world tries to appease Hitler. They try to make him happy. He signs the non-aggression pact with the USSR. And this is just prolonging the events of what's going to happen. War is inevitable based on what Hitler's trajectory, and the world just kind of drags it out rather than stops him outright. So that's it for now. The next video will get into more depth on what the United States does during World War II. So until next time, Husky historians.